Welcome back to Deviatus. I'm excited to bring you another extended edition with some content I know you're going to love. This week, I'm sitting down with Chad and Alta Dillard, who had an array of paranormal experiences, ultimately leading up to an abduction experience that you're just going to have to hear for yourself. They sent me their book, Orbduction in the French Quarter, which documents their experiences, and I had an opportunity to read it before speaking with them. I'll be giving away a copy of their book to one listener this week, so stick around at the end of the episode to hear how you can enter for a chance to win the book for free. Before we get to the interview, I just want to let you know that I do have a newsletter that's free to sign up for. Once a month, I send out the latest in paranormal news, links to all the previous month's episodes and show notes, EVPs to boggle your mind, and I'm adding more features. My next newsletter will also include my additional recommendations for books and or movies for the month relating to topics that we discussed, so make sure to check it out. You can sign up for my newsletter on my homepage at deviatus.com. Now let's jump into my conversation with Chad and Alta Dillard. Well, I do want to say thank you for sending me a copy of your book. I actually have 2 copies now. I don't know why the mail took so long first time around. I think I got the second one a lot quicker, but
wow,
right.
I did read through it. I've got I kind of have some great questions for you, but I also kind of want to hear the story in your own words. I have been talking to Shannon from Into the Fray quite a little bit about your interview, and she actually sent me a question that she forgot to ask you that I'll get to later on.
Awesome.
But yeah, we talk every once in a while regarding some of these interviews where we get the same guests, and I just loved on her show how you guys broke it down. So I don't know if you're up for it now, but I'd love to hear kind of your version and just kind of go from there.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. We thank you again for having us, and before we go any further, and thank you so much for just even having interest in what's going on with us. Right. So,
Sure.
We'd like to extend that first of all, and we'd also like to say Shannon was just so much fun to spend time with.
Yeah.
She's she was just a lot of fun, and we got to laugh quite a bit, and that's kind of unusual, and we both really enjoy laughing. So again, thank you so much for having us.
Of course, and before I forget, I do want to circle around at the end towards the medical imaging aspect of this, because I know you have some x-rays, and we talked a little bit about the ultrasounds. That's kind of my wheelhouse, so I do have some suggestions for you, I guess, depending on what you have the ability to do, but we can hit that later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess kind of set us up. I know you've got in your book there's the intro section where you kind of talk about how you guys met, and then what kind of got you into this high strangeness together. But I guess I'll let you take over and just kind of give us the rundown.
Well, Chad's pointing at me to begin, so I'll just kind of start from the beginning in my story, if you will. I'm 10 years older than Chad, and I happen to have been born in the late 50s in the deserts of Arizona. Of mixed native blood, Caucasian, and my mother, who has since passed, so let me emphasize, she was basically my only family member besides Chad. I met a few family, but very briefly throughout my life. So to listen to my mother tell it, she would only share it a couple of times throughout my youth, and when she would bring this story up, it would embarrass me so badly that I would disappear out of the room and just think of her as crazy, because my mom was far from crazy, and she was what I consider a self-made woman. But when she'd make this comment, it would make me just really question who she was and clearly who I was. And that is, she says that when I'm about 6 months old, so this would make it at the very end of 57, the beginning of 58, she claims that she's driving a vehicle and I'm the only passenger in the car. And she says it's during daytime, as she says, and that generally she would say a small metallic craft came down out of the sky and stopped her on the road. Now, you would think, and I certainly have had plenty of time to think about it, that that's such a huge statement that I would want to know everything about that. But not in my case. It was just the opposite. I found it just very embarrassing. And I had no interest in this area at all, to the point of where, I thought she was crazy. So I would disappear out of the room. So I'm so sorry to say, not only for anybody who cares to hear us, but for my own benefit, I never got any more information about that. But if my mother is to be believed, then in fact this seems to have been a part of my story from the very beginning, this form of high strangeness.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have Chad share with you just real briefly his beginnings, if you will, in this kind of arena.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess my first experience was when I was a small child. My dad was a farmer in Arkansas, and there was it was a soybean field out beside us, and the barn was on the other side of the field, and in between the house and the barn, there were these 3 burnt circles in the middle of the crops out there, and they were just kind of in a perfect line. And I remember my grandfather and my uncle and my dad talking and trying to figure out what had happened and how did this happen, and never seen it in all their years of farming. So that was kind of one of the first things that was kind of bizarre that I remember throughout my life.
And how old were you around then?
I was probably about 6 or 7.
6 or 7, okay.
Right, this would have made it about 71, I think, or 72.
Yeah, born in
the
66.
Delta of Arkansas, Arkansas.
Okay.
So that's in essence, kind of our first story, if you will, of this other experience. Is this something that just I don't have any more information about, can't explain any further. Chad has shared what he understands and remembers about that as well. So if you will, then we'll just go ahead and just keep right on moving.
Real quick before you do, though, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but your book covers quite a few different experiences like that. And do you feel like they're all related, or do you feel like these are separate things that are kind of happening? I know you mentioned at some point where certain people seem to just have a lot of things happen to them, but do you think they're related?
I personally have been consistent from day one to say that, and folks get so frustrated with me, but I, honest to heavens, have no idea. I just have no idea. Every time I thought I knew something else would happen to help me be reminded I knew nothing. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very precarious position that I'm in, because I just don't even know how to frame it anymore in terms of having a belief system. If I had one, I feel that's gone. I'm just experiencing. And then what we're trying very diligently to do, Chad and I, are to express to people in the best of our ability what is happening to us, and leave it to each person's. Now, Chad certainly speaks well for himself, but from my standpoint, again, thank you so much for the questions. We're very grateful for that. I just leave it to everybody's kind of concept of what is your thoughts. I'm almost as much interested in your thoughts as mine.
Okay. Well, and I'm certainly willing to give those. I didn't mean to interrupt so early, but maybe we should get to the other stories so that the audience doesn't bounce around too much, and then we can go there.
Wonderful. Well, we will move forward now, and again, it's kind of primarily around me at this point until Chad and I meet. Just to interject that I've always considered myself considering having a fairly mysterious early childhood, from the standpoint of I just literally have no memories prior to the age of around 9. I don't have any baby pictures. There is no original birth certificate. I have an amended birth certificate. Now, again, I sound like I'm trying to create a lot of mystery around myself, but again, this is what I've been dealt, just trying to understand my history. My mom was a very mysterious woman, I discovered, and again, it could be very mundane answers. I just don't know. And so, with that said, my first childhood memory is being tested for ESP in what I learned was a military hospital. in Aurora, Colorado. I was around 9, so this would have made it somewhere in 66, 67, and that is literally my first memory of. And I can't remember for the life of me the name of the test, but it is where I'm sitting at a small table with a gentleman in front of me, and there's at a desk, kind of a desktop with a divider between him and he's holding up cards that have symbols on them and asking me if I'm seeing anything. My understanding is in my mind. And so literally that is my first memory. Mm-hmm. That hospital is known as Fitzsimmons Hospital in Aurora, Colorado. I've just discovered, because I've worked very hard to do as much research as I could to try to get answers, and that's been to no avail. But anyhow, that hospital just stopped being known in that location, and they've moved it, and I believe changed somewhat of the name of it, but it can still be researched, and folks can discover, its existence. So that's my beginnings, if you will, of just coming to or waking up. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Now, there's a lot of, I consider missing time, because I just don't know how else to describe it in my mind, or at least missing memory. For instance, I have this waking up at around age 9, being tested, and then I don't have any memory of leaving Colorado and then relocating with my mom and stepfather to the Midwest. But that's certainly what we did, and I spent about 10 years of my life in the Midwest. And that would be high school, first years of college. And in that experience, before I hand this back to Chad, I'd like to also mention I've had some connections after being gone from the Midwest for many years of my life, 30, 40 years. I got reconnected with some childhood friends after not seeing them literally for 40 years. And in our connections, I discovered with each one of them, there were 3 separate people we had either together or separately. One in particular identified having an absolute flat-out UFO experience where the UFO was down low or just above the street, and she was with another girlfriend. And she claims that this happened right after I moved from that state. And then I had another girlfriend that I discovered. We spent quite a bit of time with each other when we reunited, and she describes a full-blown memory of us having an encounter with a light that she claims came down out of the sky at nighttime. There's a whole lot of mystery around that story as well, so I'm trying not to take up all the time with all these different events. But apparently, just to emphasize, it sounds like it's been peeking into my life for the most part, pretty much all my life. But again, before Chad does start to speak, I just would like you to remember I had no interest. I've had no interest in any of this until after Chad and I were brought together. And then, Chad, any other childhood that you can think of? So now, if you will, then we'll get us to 1990, Little Rock, Arkansas. At that time, I'm 33 and Chad was 23. I had never been married before and had no children, nor at the time did I have any interest in either one of them. So with that said, I believe it had only been a short time prior to that I had returned to Arkansas from the West Coast. And my mother was living there. I had moved back and I was staying with my mom. And it was just her and I in the home. And my mom and I were starting to have difficulty with each other. And, of course, as I've said in the past, I was probably way too old to be staying with my mom or living with my mom. But anyhow, such as it was, we were starting to really have issues with each other. And it seemed to be the background to set that night up of the beginnings, if you will, of Chad and I. So it happens to be on Valentine's, and that just made it all the worse for me. And prior to this experience, I had been working in the medical field with pretty much what I'd consider more hands-on kinds of employment. Just about a week or so prior to that Valentine's, I had left hands-on kind of work, and I took a job that I'd never done before, and it was actually selling medical equipment. Well, you can't be any, worse of a choice for Alta than equipment, because I am just not technically sound at all. And so it was a very frustrating situation for me, because I discovered very quickly this is not someplace I belong. I'm not happy, and it's making things worse for me. So again, everything's setting up my mood, it seems like, and my mood is very sour on that Valentine's Day. So I happened to work with a guy by the name of David. David's a a new father. Had been married, I think, probably a couple of years. And he was very frustrated that I didn't have a date for Valentine's. So he inserted himself into my life and decided he was going to arrange a blind date for me. Try to speed the story along a little bit. It worked out where that blind date couldn't make the date because he had to work that evening via the conversation going on between David and whoever he's calling. So that didn't set the mood any better for me. I go home. I decide I'm going to do something extremely out of character, and that's drink and drive. And again, as I've said before, I'm far from a saint, but I don't drink and drive. And I never go anywhere alone. That's extremely out of character. So it ends up, I'm out alone. I'm, making decisions that are very strange for me. I end up, and again, there's a whole lot more to this story, but to get to the point of the meeting with Chad, it seems like there are what appear to be human. There are two men that get involved in this story early on that appear to be human, but at this stage and for a very long time, I've been convinced that, I don't know, I use the word otherworldly because there certainly seems to be so much more to this than meets the eye. But I felt that these gentlemen were used or chose, whatever the case may be, to make sure that I ended up in a location where I would end up meeting Chad. It ends up that I chose a location that evening to go to a big sports bar, and again, just on top of all the other high strangeness, a term that I borrowed a long time ago that I apply to anything weird or paranormal or unexplainable. This location, a large sports bar towards the center of the city of Little Rock, 1990. Little Rock was probably close to 300,000 people at the time. So the point is it was a fairly large city and capital of the state. Had a lot of bars and clubs and restaurants, but of all places, I picked a sports bar I'd never been to. Before the evening is over on Valentine's Day, I'm sitting at the bar and I'm all by myself and I'm having a very, very bad night. It feels like I'm sinking into my gloominess. And as I'm sinking, all of a sudden this very sweet voice walks up to me and, speaks to me. And I have Chad share with you what that was all about.
Yeah, I come in and I was working at an oyster bar at the time, and everybody else was guys there that worked with me. So and nobody had dates. So we decided that everybody decided they were going to go play darts. Well, I tag along with everybody else, and this was a place I'd never been, and we're all getting ready to play darts, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't really want to, so I leave my friends and go over and start playing pinball by myself, instead of hanging out with my buddies, and I play a game of pinball, and I noticed this girl standing at the bar, so I go up and ask her if she'd, like to play pinball, and she kind of looked at me funny and then said, sure. And we play a game of pinball, and where after that first game, she says, well, what's your name? And I said, Chad. And she goes, you know a guy named David? I said, yeah. Did he call you today? Yeah. Well, I'm the blind date that you were supposed to meet. So we were like a blind date that didn't happen, that happened anyway. It was like divine. Something brought us. I mean, because this, Little Rock is a big town, and there was other places that we could have gone to that were a lot closer to where we were.
Mm-hmm.
But and then for me to not hang out with my buddies, but we end up spending time together that evening and everything. And found out within the first 24 hours of meeting, and I'll let Alta tell this part. She does it a little bit better than I do, but yeah, we had some very strange
connections.
Coincidence. Yeah,
Chad's using the word coincidence. So just to kind of frame that little story off of our beginnings for people who are pondering the fact that, the word synchronicity has been used with us, and I find that even an interesting word, because it's one thing to meet each other in a city the size that we met each other in a location neither of us had been to before. But it was another thing within 24 hours to discover through Chad's mother that his grandfather, her father, who had passed by the time I had met Chad, his birth name that's on his tombstone is Alta, which of course is my first name, and his last name is Duncan, and that happens to be my mother's name, which is essentially my name. And so, as I've said in the past, I'm an odds girl. What are the odds? What are the odds that we would meet each other on a blind date that didn't happen, that happened anyhow? There's more, of course, to the story with my idea of some kind of intercedence or hidden hand involved in making sure that Chad and I got to the same location, and then discovering again within that short amount of time this name connection. I'll just add that Chad had no idea what was happening inside of me, but because I'd already had so much mystery in my life anyhow, this did not sit well with me at all. It frightened me to the core, because I knew right then and there I didn't have any way to explain, and I still don't, but I knew at that moment that there was what clearly felt like something else involved in my life that I didn't like. So I chose to hide for 3 months. Chad could not find me he tried to connect with me right away after we met, and I just made a choice that was enough of that. I wasn't going to go through with that. And so not a good choice, but it was my behavior. And so anyhow, we didn't see each other for 3 months. At the point that we finally get reconnected again, it's because something inside of me told me to find Chad. Now, it's not an outside voice. It was an inner voice, and it was my own consciousness, but it was determination. I was now determined that I was going to find him. And so that was quite a journey. And again, I felt like I had outside help because I did relocate. I did find Chad. But at the time, he was out of state. I was guided to find him out of state via the phone. And we had a short conversation, and he indicated to me that he was returning back to Little Rock within 24 hours. And so I promised him that I wouldn't run again, that I would be there, and that I was looking so forward to seeing him when he arrived. So we had it all worked out. Well, what I neglected to mention is that when I found Chad, he had just been recently in a bad car accident with some of his family members, an aunt and an uncle. And he's not hospitalized, but he's pretty beat up. And so he's returning beat up, essentially. I'm so happy he's returning. And I make it clear that I'll be there. Well, we hang up the phone, and I had a guy friend who had a motorcycle. I love to ride on motorcycles. So he decides he's going to come by and pick me up, and we're going to go for the day out in, a ride on the bike. And as we're returning home several hours later, there's no way to explain this because we're sober. There's no weather conditions for what happened, but that bike came out from under us, completely came out from under us. My friend stayed with the bike and slid, I don't know how many feet. I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating. I went airborne. I had a helmet on with a face shield, and when I hit the ground, the shield apparently collapsed. I must have hit face down. Shield collapsed into my face, and it cut my eyebrow to the bone, cut down through the bone to the bone. And so I had a big gash, needless to say, in my eye. And all the road rash that goes with it and all of the trauma with that. So I end up in the hospital when Chad returns, and I don't show up again. And so it took me a while to get out of the hospital. And when I finally did, Chad and I essentially got reconnected, all beat up, needless to say, because he's still recovering from his accident, and I'm freshly stitched and road rashed with mine. And we came back together, and from that moment on decided we were going to stick together at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of our real beginnings, if you will, as sad as it sounds. Just kind of a badly written comedy of errors. So this was in 1990. Now, we married in 1991, a year later, and now I will move us forward again to 1995. My mom has left Arkansas, and she's moved to Louisiana, and she's kind of out in the boonies of Louisiana, kind of the swamps of Louisiana. Chad and I are out of state. She's invited us to come and join her. Chad and I had made a decision to never have children, so we lived a very spontaneous kind of life. He was in agreement. He loved my mom. She loved him. So we relocated to Louisiana. Now, in 1995, at the time, we lived in an area outside of a place called Hammond, Louisiana, which is a small college or university town. And we were kind of out in the boonies, fairly close to that community. And I'll have Chad share with you what happened in 1995 that leads us into the, as they call it, the main event, 97.
And real quick, Chad, before you start, I feel like we're getting a little muffled as we go on here. I don't know if you.
Okay.
If
Does
there's
that sound better?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
My connection's here.
There we go.
I moved the mic a little bit, so I may have.
No, that's perfect. I'm sorry to interrupt there.
No, that's fine. But yeah, so 1995, and we're going into town for the evening to go to get some dinner. And as we get into town, there's kind of a bend in the road, and there's this group of trees, and behind this group of trees is the local Walmart. So we get around this group of trees, around this bend in the road, and we look up into the sky, and there's this craft, and it is huge. I mean, stadium size huge, like motherships size. It's bigger than the shopping center, the parking lot. I mean, it's low to the ground. It's, again, way below cloud level and moving very, very slow. It's kind of a rectangle, but not as wide in the front as it is in the back. Very smooth. There's like 2 or 3 lights in the front, 2 or 3 lights in the back. We both kind of, Alta and I both, it's on the right-hand side of the road, we both kind of look up at it, and then we both kind of look down and at each other, like saying, what the hey? And I kind of glanced back at it again, and then focused my attention back to the road, because, it just, our minds exploded, and it was just so. We never spoke about it. We didn't talk about it. We never noticed anybody, else noticing it or pulling over to the road or pointing into the sky or anything like that. But that was our first experience as far as UFO.
I'd like to also interject that it was also still light out.
Yeah.
The sun had not completely set yet. So it was very clear that there was a floating city in the sky. And Chad, as I've always says this much calmer than what actually happened to us. Now, he handled that perfectly because he's the driver. I, on the other hand, went into complete shock. And I don't remember being in shock prior to that. So I know what that felt like. And I felt like Chad just said, my brain exploded. My head flipped away from it so fast that I barely took it in, because I knew I was just beyond shocked. And all I could do was stare at Chad, begging for that not to be there. I didn't say anything, but that was my response and my reaction. When I finally turned my head back to the road, I kept my eyes straight ahead. And again, I was still in shock.
Yeah, it was like, if we don't look at it and we don't notice it, it won't notice us. It won't see us if we don't see it.
Crazy thinking.
Kind of thought ran through our heads, or my head anyway. But
our heads.
It was like, okay, don't nothing going on here.
How many people would you say were around?
It was a weekend night, like a Friday night, so the traffic was, steady.
Yeah.
There was certainly plenty driving with us and around us.
It's not a big town, but I do remember, traffic and people, going on and driving down the road.
Yeah, we weren't out on a country road all by ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, wow, I mean, you would have heard about it on the news or...
Well, we did learn about that the next morning.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah, there were other people that had reported seeing craft in the sky.
Through the news, and we discovered it, which of course made it a reality for us, but we still never spoke about it. We still never spoke about it.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. I mean, having my own, I've had it wasn't a UFO experience, but I had an experience where I did see something while I was driving and no one else seemed to notice at the time. So I guess I can kind of relate to that feeling of like, am I going crazy?
Right.
Exactly. Oh boy, exactly.
So when you found out about it on the news, what was your reaction then? Like, did you start talking about it?
No, as I said, we never spoke about it. Again, it was by choice. As Chad said, I felt that was a perfect description of how we were reacting, which is if we don't talk about it, if we don't acknowledge it, it didn't see us. Now, there is no logic to anything that we're saying to you, but it is what we experienced and how we experienced it. We chose to stay silent about it.
Yeah. But it also, it told us that we weren't crazy and we didn't see things. It wasn't just us that saw it, that it was, other people had witnessed it. So it did
it did seem to force a reality, but it was not a reality we were interested in dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Again, I had no interest in the area that I ever remember of the past, nor did Chad, to the best of my knowledge. Maybe a little bit of sci-fi, and I never even really had any interest in any of that. So again, it was not an area that we had any interest in. But even with this strange experience, we still never dealt with it.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I don't know what I would have done.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I think we should move on to New Orleans because you actually lived in a I don't want to say famous, maybe infamous place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So it was very shortly after we had this experience with this, I guess for lack of other words, craft in the sky in 95. Very shortly after that, Chad and I chose to move to the French Quarter. French Quarter is about an hour away from that location. So from the moment we landed in the French Quarter, best description is we're very naive. And we're excited, and we're looking so forward to having this life experience in the French Quarter. But did I mention how naive we were? Neither one of us had ever dealt with voodoo, hoodoo, witchcraft as such. Chad's family may have had a little more hint with that than I had ever really experienced. But for the most part, this is all new territory to us. And I might add, when we speak about voodoo, hoodoo, and so on, neither of us really had an interest in that area as well. I have my native background, and I've had my full regalia all my life, and that is my world as such. Even though I'm not raised with the people, I'm raised around the world by my mom. It was inbred inside of me, in my mind, my consciousness of having this native past. And I've tried to honor it to the best of my ability, which means that I just wasn't open to it wasn't necessary for me to be involved in other religious or belief systems. So as you mentioned, the infamous location, Chad and I, our first location, due to economics, because we had no idea how expensive it was to live in the French Quarter. When you live on the outskirts of it, as we first did, when we first moved there, we lived on the border of the quarter, and the quarter is about 13 blocks, I understand. So this location happens to be above the original Voodoo Temple. It's a small apartment. The structures on this property were all originally slave quarters and voodoo temple and voodoo priestess and priest confines and what have you. And this location, we understand, was built in the 16 or the 1700s and had been converted. Anything that could be converted on the property into a small apartment or efficiency apartment had been done so, with the exception of the priestess. She had the largest structure. There was a huge courtyard that divided her home from these smaller structures, that this two-story building that had been turned into several efficiency apartments. Quite adorable, I might add. And then Chad and I had the apartment right above the Voodoo Temple. There was an apartment right next to us. We were on the second floor. The temple was literally below that apartment next to us, and then we were right above their little shop attached to the temple. It's all kind of in one.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that started immediately, having Chad and I both experienced ghosties, time slips. I thought I had, and again, it's just my understanding. I never asked her who she was, but it certainly appeared that I had a Virgin Mary-like apparition, with the possibility of some females that may have been slaves on that property back in the 1700s. Chad certainly had his experiences of ghosties, if you will. If you're interested and there's time, we'd have him share with you his encounter with the actual voodoo priest that had died prior to us moving to that property.
Yeah.
This was about the first, I'm thinking this is like the first week we were there. And we're laying in bed, and I kept feeling like something was crawling across my chest. So I'd wake up and I'd scratch, and I'd wake up and I'd scratch throughout the night. And this had happened. And, if it was something crawling across my chest, crawling across me, it would be in different places. It wouldn't be in the same exact spot. So, and I woke up the next morning and I scratched a couple layers of skin off. Well, I go on and get up, and I had the morning shift at the restaurant that I worked at. And so I get up and I go on to work, and this vision starts coming back to me, from the night before. And I remember this very short-statured African-American man. Now, I could only see him from his waist up. From his waist down, it was kind of like a mist or cloud or fog. And then from his waist up, he had no shirt on. He was bare-chested. He had some like African beads around him. He had a very short kind of afro. And I remember him, and I'm laying down, so I'm horizontal, and he's kind of floating above me horizontally. And I'm laying there, and he would take his finger and tickle me right on my chest, kind of right around my heart area. And I would go up and scratch. And again, he did this throughout the night 4 or 5 times. Well, I get home from work, and I grab the smudge stick. After being Native American, we always had the smudge stick. So I got that, and Alta's at work, so I'm there by myself, and I get it going, and I'm like, hey, we're going to have us a nice little apartment here. I'm going to paint it up and keep it all clean. I said, you don't have to go anywhere. Just leave me alone. So I never had any more issues. Well, a couple months later, another couple had moved in down below us. And they had been married by the voodoo priest who had recently died before we moved in. But they start bringing out their wedding pictures from their ceremony, their wedding ceremony. And they said, well, this is priest, and I can't remember his name, but this is priest such and such. And I take the picture and I look and I tell them the same story I just told you. And they're like, yeah, that sounds right. He was a trickster. He would test you. He would mess with you and make you prove that, he wanted you around him or was able to hang out with him. So, that was kind of my first really crazy thing there at that temple and in the French Quarter. I've had other crazy things in the French Quarter too. I'd always hear my name call, or always feel something. I've had something touch me one time at a restaurant I worked at. But it definitely opened our eyes and started amping up our experiences there.
So, to accent the infamous part of this apartment is it took us several months to get our feet on the ground, and we knew fairly immediately that we did not want to live there any longer than we had to. So we were working very hard to get ourselves established, and we were doing so. We finally got moved out of that voodoo apartment, and then we'd also like to mention, that, anytime that there was a movie out of Hollywood, or, the big movie companies that needed to make a movie about anything that had to do with voodoo, hoodoo, or what have you, seemed like it was made in our courtyard at this temple. So now we're also dealing with, maybe a world you're more familiar with, Jeremy, where you are, but certainly was not a world we were familiar with, which is movie companies and actors and personalities and big egos. And just trying to get in and out of our apartment at times was very difficult, getting around all of this, production, as they say. So we were just having very bizarre experiences, human and otherwise. So the infamous part of this apartment, just to, again, kind of close that story off, that chapter, is Chad and I lived there in 1995. We discovered that 10 years later, in 2005, the infamous Katrina, the hurricane, of course, there was a young couple that moved into our apartment. They got quite the notoriety for the sake of being this young couple that refused to evacuate during Katrina. They stayed in the quarter. They both were very hard partiers, both in the bar business. They loved alcohol and they loved drugs. And when they had the French Quarter to themselves, essentially, they were in heaven because it was abandoned and they had access to all that they desired. And they liked it that way. When the world started to return to New Orleans after Katrina, then, of course, the lights were back on and life started kind of moving back in again. And they didn't like that. And it wasn't sitting well with either one of them. They essentially started having lots of problems and got into a huge fight. And he killed her. He murdered her. He then chopped her up. And he had parts of her cooking on our stove, parts of her in the refrigerator, parts of her in the oven. After we learned that she had stayed in that apartment dead for a week before it was discovered what he had done to her, after apparently he killed her, he goes to one of the fanciest, the nicest, if you will, one of the nicest hotels in the middle of the quarter, and he goes to the rooftop to drink. They had an outdoor bar and, band and what have you. And apparently he spent several hours on top of the rooftop having a party with himself and then walked over to the edge of the rooftop and jumped. And apparently when he hit the ground, and of course, needless to say, it killed him. When the detectives or the police got to him, there was a note inside his pocket, if I understand correctly, instructing them to go to that apartment. Of course, when they got there, they discovered this mayhem that he had done in this apartment with this young woman. There was all kinds of graffiti all over the walls. Since then, a gentleman out of New York City learned about this experience. This young couple, their names are Zach and Addie. It's very easy to find out all kinds of information about this. This author wrote a book, and it's either Shake Off the Devil or Shake the Devil Off. And it shows photos of the apartment and what have you. And again, more notoriety to that location. And then Chad and I left, just fast forwarding, we'll back up here in a moment, but just to finish this story off, we left the New Orleans area. We left Louisiana originally in 2001, and we've only returned this last year. So we've been gone essentially for 15 years to discover all of this. Now, the year that Chad and I decided to return, that voodoo temple and apartment all caught fire 10 years later. So we live in 95. 10 years later, we have this horrible killing and cannibalistic and what have you. And then 10 years later, it all burns down. So that is the story of that location.
Do you think knowing about all that would have affected your decision to move there?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. As I said, we moved very naive. We were very naive. My mother was a self-made woman, if you will, by virtue of her own accomplishments, a degree in law. President Clinton, when he was governor, he may have been attorney general at the time, was one of my mother's law professors for a semester. She was considered a mixed Indian as well, somewhat of an elder. She had a lot of respectability to her. Mm-hmm. And this was not an area, nothing that I was ever raised with or connected with, nor was Chad. Mm-hmm. But my mother was also a craftswoman, and she made drums. She created drums authentically, native drums. And I mention all of that because when Chad and I first moved to the quarter, and we were trying to find a place to live, not realizing, again, what we were walking into, the Voodoo Temple had this amazing situation in the back in the courtyard with drumming for the priestess as well as tourism. This is huge tourism. And as I mentioned, this is a movie-making operation. So lots and lots of money involved in all of this. And in all honesty, it was those drums that called us there originally. I was homesick. I missed my mom. I missed the native world of what I had been raised in. And those drums were quite beautiful, and they absolutely called us in. And I would say kind of mesmerized us at first, not blaming it on anything, but we were so naive. We have no interest in any of this. No.
Well,
I mean, the voodoo priestess had a chicken coop at the end of her home with live chickens that were used. No, we have no interest in this.
Well, I'm looking at, just throughout your whole experience in the French Quarter, I feel like this is just like tip of the iceberg stuff. You really had that one occasion with the kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a werewolf or a dogman. I'd love to touch on that if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Well, this leads us into, it's perfect timing because it's leading us right into what we call the 97 event. And again, this is, as far as we're concerned, truly touching the iceberg because so much of our story has been edited down to the book that you received, which is fairly small, but we intend to add more if there's interest out there, filling in so much of these stories that have happened to us. So now you will fast forward, it was 95, we're now into 97 in the French Quarter. Chad and I have left that Voodoo Temple area. We've moved further into the central part of the quarter, which is much nicer. It's very expensive. And Chad and I were doing quite well at the time in our employment. Where I was at and what Chad was doing, he was kind of an entrepreneur and building his own reputation, and I was working very hard at what I did. And at the time, I worked in a shop that was owned by a family that had started their business in 1929. So they were extremely well established, had been around at that point at 70 years. They ran a very tight ship, and they kept their business in the family. And then they had outsiders like myself come in, offering the services that we offered. So this so happens they have hired a young woman she's relocated from another state. At the time she was 24, I had just turned 40. Chad was 30, to give the perspective of ages. From the time I met this young woman, she's known as Christine in the book. From the time I met her, it felt very familiar. I so enjoyed her. Just from the time I met her, like she was friend from long ago or family. And we had a very quick connection. And she's tall, slender, long blonde hair, uh, a wonderful, gregarious kind of laugh, giggle. She loves to laugh. She's no drama queen whatsoever, but she is very much one that I consider who, in her mind, has a very strong definition of right and wrong. She, at the time, was dating a young guy that I called Dark Boy. His name was Will. He was her opposite. He had long black hair. He was quite adorable, like she is, but he was totally her opposite, meaning he had a darkness about him, not only his coloring, his hair, but just his temperament. It seemed to me his mood. I didn't spend much time with him. She only dated him, as I say, like for a minute. But the day that she decided that she was going to let him know she wanted to see other people, it was daytime. She invites him over to her porch. She lived in a duplex. They're out on her front porch. She's standing very close to him, just a few inches apart, face to face. As she's beginning to tell him, I'm paraphrasing this, the kind of I like your butt story, he is, as she says it, is becoming extremely emotional, as if it's from the inside out. She says he starts to get almost like shaking. And she says as she's telling him she wants to see other people, all of a sudden, these are her words, and I absolutely believe her. I've never doubted her. She said that he turned into a wolf. She said her head turned away instantly, and I knew exactly what she was saying, because that's why I described to you how I reacted in 95 when we saw that, whatever that was up in the sky. Mm-hmm. I did the exact same thing. So did our friend. Her head turned instantly in shock. She looked back at him, and he must have flipped back into human and then shifted a second time. So, as Chad reminds me, I guess this is what we would truly call a shapeshifter. But in this case, this shapeshifter into a wolf. She said he turned into a wolf a second time. She said in a very direct voice, and I'll clean this up, you just turned into an effing wolf. And she said he responded to her in a very startled tone. You saw that. So, as I've mentioned in the past, and I continue consistently to say to folks, this is her truth, and I absolutely believe her. Now, that took place just a very short amount of time prior to our event, what the three of us went through. So as far as I'm concerned, her experience with this shape-shifting, this what I call the wolfy boy, just took place just days, if not a few weeks prior to us having our event. That all seems to be tied in the weirdest way. So
it's so strange.
Right. Exactly. And we're talking the French Quarter. I mean, as I repeat this, and each time I do repeat it, and I listen to Chad repeat his portions of this, it's like what you were seeing on television that they create out of the quarter, or these TV series. I've never watched any of them, but they're certainly being filmed around us all the time, and it's just so insane. Yeah. Vampires and wolves and voodoo, and I mean, it's just so insane. It's as if we have been living a live movie.
Well, I do want to get to your kind of the main experience here from your book. I think, yeah. I really hope people listen to Shannon's show where she had you on. She had you on a couple times, and I know I'm a little more pressed for time, but I think it's worth going to her show and listening to that whole interview as well, just because, I think she did a good job of getting all the details, and mm-hmm. I want to try to get as much in as we can. But why don't you take us to that night? And you were saying that all three of you were there. Is that correct?
Right. So not long again after this takes place with our friend and Wolfie Boy, this happens in around September of 97. 3 months prior to that, May of 97, is my birthday. And my mother happened to die on my birthday. We lost my mom literally on my birthday. And she's planning to move to the French Quarter to spend her remaining days, years with us. And it's not meant to be. So Chad and I are going through 3 months of shock and dealing with my mother's affairs, what have you. Christine asked me if I wanted to go out that evening after work into the quarter and have dinner and drinks. And I accepted. We called Chad. At that time, Chad and I only lived a couple blocks from the shop. So Chad's going to walk over and meet us at the shop, and then we're going to just take off, the three of us, and have a very spontaneous night with no plans. From the moment we started our evening, it was around 9:30 when she locked the doors and we leave the shop, and it is, again, just the three of us. From literally the moment I remember coming out of the shop, I remember making a statement, almost like I can still feel it. It felt different outdoors. The energy felt off. I hate to sound so corny, but the vibe felt off. And I don't know how else to describe that to you. I took note of it. I made a comment about it. I remember them acknowledging it as well. And we start off on our evening. We're going to start on the famous Bourbon Street. We're going to start on one end of the quarter and walk all the way across it, 13 blocks. We're going to stop wherever we care to, do as we please. None of us had children again, and we're just going to have a spontaneous night. Well, that was not meant to be. Again, just to keep fast-forwarding the story to get us to that actual corner. By the time we crossed the quarter, we've stopped at 3 different locations. We've also taken note of there are no people, as in there are a few stragglers on the street, but there are no people. It is highly unusual. It's like being now in the Twilight Zone. That's what it felt like. It felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. Every bar we stopped at, there was no patrons. There were no customers. There was one person that would either be a bar manager or a manager. But there were no people, not anywhere.
And some of the places that we stopped weren't just tourist places. They were local clubs and stuff like that.
And a lot of the locations had restaurants as well, with no wait staff.
Yeah, so you'd think it'd be busy.
Well, you'd think it'd at least be normal. This is highly abnormal is what we're describing to you. As I said, it was like the Twilight Zone. By the time we get to our last location, it's 11 o'clock. This is what the three of us remember collectively. So we've got from 9:30 to 11. There's been a lot of bizarreness in between. We are on our last street. I and Chad step away from our friend a few feet. I'm telling Chad privately, I just want to go home. I'm over this. I'm bored. I just want to go home. These are the last words I remember saying to him. The next thing I know, now it's 11 o'clock at night. The next thing I know, it's the next morning. I'm sitting straight up in my living room on my daybed. I had a brass daybed in my living room. I'm sitting straight up, Indian style. I am rubbing my arms. I've got something in my upper arm that was not there, or at least I was not aware of it the night before. And I am flipping out because I'm the only one out of the three that seems to have been having this experience with memory of in between. I have no memory of coming off that street and no memory of being returned home. And I also seem to be the only one out of the three that has, I call the object an unknown. Everyone else calls it an implant. I've always used the word unknown in my upper arm that you have those x-rays of. So again, for the sake of time and the story's sake, if you're interested, we'll have Chad share with you. We found somebody several years later to give Chad hypnotic regression. So he had a regression done, and he has an account of that evening through the regression. And then I might also add, if there is time and you're interested, we'd like to also share with you what happened to our friend. She has given us permission to describe what she expressed to us happened to her as well.
Sure. Then, I think one of the parts that I did want to touch on, though, was your experience with pulling a piece of it out.
Right. Yeah, that was that morning when I came to. I love to express for people to know, because, again, I would have never understood the difference without having the experience. I didn't wake up the next day, I came to. So my eyes pop open, and I have memory, this very full-blown memory of in between. And as I'm rubbing my arm, I feel something sticking out of my upper arm that felt like a piece of cactus. Now, what's so bizarre about that, as if not all of this isn't bizarre, is that there was no pain at all. It didn't pinch. It didn't, if you've got a piece of cactus sticking in you or a sticker, you're going to feel something. Well, I didn't. And as my hand was rubbing over it, I could feel the sharpness, and that puzzled me on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. So I go into the bathroom to try to get this thing out of my arm. I keep my nails cut very short, so I needed a pair of tweezers. I get the tweezers, I pull this thing out of my arm. It's very tiny, without exaggeration, extremely tiny, less than 1/8 of an inch or somewhere. I'm so bad with measurement. It comes out of my arm what appears to be a solid, but I got it between my fingers, and it starts to change almost immediately. And what I mean by change is it becomes liquidy. It becomes viscous, almost like it looked like a piece of celery fiber. Mm-hmm. If that's the best way I know how to describe it. And then it starts dissolving. When that happened, now I am flipping, not as if I wasn't flipping out already prior, but now I'm really in high gear. I turn the faucet on, I begin to scrub, and I'm scrubbing again till I think I'm going to bleed. I want that off of me. Mm-hmm. I just want that away from me. And I remember taking note that there was a teeny tiny little hole in my arm where I pulled that out. Now there's no blood or anything like that. Again, no pain. But now there is a lump underneath that tiny hole that's pretty good size. Like the size of it seems to change. Let me suggest this. There's so much bizarreness about this. It seems at times it will push a lump underneath the skin, where it's just underneath the top layer of skin, and it looks like a big bug bite, a big mosquito bite. It seems like it will push so hard against the skin. I don't feel any of that, but you can clearly see a lump with your naked eye when it's pushing against the skin. Mm-hmm. Then there are times that it seems to bury itself all the way down to the bone, where only I know that it's in there. And again, tremendous high strangeness involved with all of this. But that is what I experienced immediately. As I get connected to Chad that morning, Chad is looking at my arm, because now Chad is in a state of pure, silent confusion. He has no memory at all past 11 o'clock the night before. None of us remember having any alcohol, and none of us remember any drugs. So we're as sober can be in our understanding. So Chad walks around me after I show him my arm. I'll have Chad share with you just very briefly what it was he saw about my arms. We never took pictures of any of this because we could have cared about pictures. We were in a state of terror.
Yeah, it was like somebody had either held her from behind, or maybe two people, one on each arm or something like that. But there were these very long fingerprints all the way around her upper arm. And they were very light bruise. And they only stayed there for, like 24, 30 hours maybe at the most. They had pretty much disappeared the next day. But it was just these 4 very long fingerprints, and 4 digits around her upper arm.
And do you recall seeing those, Alta?
As you asked me that, I have a brief memory of it, but I was in such a state of, I used the word terror, a controlled chaos inside, that I question everything. But yes, but very briefly, I'm so grateful that Chad did see this, because he saw them very clearly. we were missing a friend when I came to and Chad woke up. She was missing. Our friend was missing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had no accounting for her. Now not only are we discovering this with my body, but we're immediately, where is our friend? And oh my God, again, you have our little book. If you've taken note of the beginning of that, Chad and I lost a mutual friend that I felt very close to in the beginnings of our relationship that also plagued us with a huge mystery for over 20 years. It took 20 years for that murder to be solved. Mm-hmm. And so now we come to, I come to, Chad wakes up, and we've got a friend missing again. And the psychology of all of that is
it's got to be like craziness. PTSD almost.
There's no question about it. I have just only started using that term recently in trying to define to a couple of people who are, learning about what's happening with us and so on, that I'm positive this is what has been going on in our lives.
Yeah. Wow. And so how did you end up eventually linking up with your friend?
So it took 2 days. Chad and I chose to go silent. Again, we had no answers, and we remind folks there was no book of rules. And we had nowhere to turn. We had no idea what to do, so we did nothing. We sat still. We never left our townhouse. We, as they say, hunkered down and just waited and prayed like we'd never prayed before to the heavens that she would contact us. Mm-hmm. She didn't. So we went through that for 48 hours. So 2 days later, I had to go back to work. I get to work and she's there. She's at work. Almost like nothing had ever happened. Well, I've had a long time to process all of that. And the only thing that makes any sense to me is, A, she didn't lose a friend as we had under the worst of circumstances that set that fear inside of us normally, just naturally. And also, she was only 24 at the time. And I just feel like there was just such a big difference in our age and how we handle things. Mm-hmm. Just by virtue of this big difference in age, even. She saw it as she knows that something happened to her that night. She knows it. She has no idea what. She has no memory from, in her case, her story is she starts it with last memory is 11-ish, just like Chad and I on that street corner. And then the next thing she knows is she's now behind the steering wheel of her slowly moving car. And the car has hit a parked car and knocked off her rear view mirror, which is what jolted her to. So that's how she woke up. She's jolted to behind the steering wheel of her car. The car is in a whole different section of the city from where she parked the car that morning. And the car seems to be heading. Now, as she's coming to, she's, of course, driving it. But that car is moving before she comes to. And the car seems to be heading to Wolfie Boy's house. That crazy story that we shared with you some time ago about Wolfie Boy. And that's not an individual she was ever going to see again. Because that was not something she was interested in. She has no interest in any of this either, to the best of our knowledge. We're still friends. All these years later, we're connected long distance. So she didn't, in fact, she's gone on to college and gotten her degree in environmental science. She is very earth-rooted, science-rooted. And this does not compute, as they say. So that's the last person she's ever going to see again. And that's exactly where she's headed. And that's who she ends up seeing again. Mm-hmm. And, it's just as bizarre and creepy as all the rest of it. Just finishing it up on Wolfie Boy, if I might, so that there's context to all of this. I discovered several years later, because this took place with the three of us in 97. Now, if you'll fast forward to 2001, Chad and I have had a separation. Chad has left Louisiana and gone to Alabama, where his family are. He's going to go to work for his dad. I chose to stay behind, so I'm still in the French Quarter working. And not doing very well. Once Chad and I separated, I wasn't doing well at all. But I'm working very hard. I get off work one afternoon. It's a beautiful day in the quarter. The quarter's packed like normal. And as I'm walking through the crowds, I hear somebody yell my name. Well, Alta's a very unusual name. I caught that. I recognized a friend that I hadn't seen in a few years. He's extremely tall. There was no way to miss him above the crowd. He's close to 7 foot tall and very thin. Makes him look even taller. Mm-hmm. This guy's he's a traveling artist. He's originally from Montauk, New York. At the time, I didn't know nothing about Montauk. I've learned an awful lot about it since and all of its high strangeness. Mm-hmm. So just kind of adding that to the weirdness of this story. This guy's name is Rich. So he wants to see me, wants to sit. We're so happy to see each other. We sit down. He asks me if I want to have a drink. We sit at a little outdoor cafe. He orders a Coke. I may have ordered a beer. But I'm honest to tell you, again, I don't remember drinking that beer. In the time it takes Rich to roll a cigarette, he is learning about Chad and I separating. He seems extremely distraught about this. I think everybody was, because Chad and I have always been thought of as a good couple, make a good couple. And biggest shock to anybody is that we would separate. So as we're having that conversation, all of a sudden out of nowhere, Rich changes the conversation to, hey, have you heard about Will? And I'm like, I'm beyond puzzled. It just hit me like a brick. And I'm like, Will? Dark Boy? Are you talking about Dark Boy? I didn't even know you knew Will. And it's not as strange that he would know Will, because, again, he's an artist. We were all kind of that sort of community. But it just surprised me. It came out of left field. And I said, no, I haven't seen him nor heard anything about him. And he says, yeah, he's going around telling everybody he's got to catch a bus and get out of town because the aliens are after him. Now, I just want you to know that, and I have said this before, and I'm still in shock as I repeat it. At that point now, it's over as far as I'm concerned. I am so over this. I'm getting angry inside. I feel like I'm looking for cameras, like I'm on somebody's really bad, candid camera, and I'm being made fun of, and I don't like it. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking high strangeness, paranormal. I'm thinking this is so effing weird. I can't get my brain wrapped around this, and I just want this to stop. Well, at that point, my friend stands up and hugs and says he's got to run, and that's the end of the Wolfie Boy story. Mm-hmm. Our friend has gone on. She had a child a year or so after our experience, a son that she has worked very hard to give an amazing life to, and now is in college himself and has done quite an amazing job with her life. But to the best of our knowledge, has never had any interest of being public about any of this, probably for very good reason. We've taken a lot of ridicule, and of course we were open to that. We certainly pray that people will be open and hear us, but of course, that's kind of dreaming. But so she has chosen to stay quiet. But certainly I got her portion of all of this in writing, if you will, several years ago. And that's online.
Is that from her?
Right. I asked her, I said, this would have been probably about 7 years ago. I asked her long distance if she would record for posterity's sake, and also to help me if I ever started thinking I was crazy and that I had somehow or other manifested this. I've always known different, but so she agreed to that, and she wrote her version. But what's so interesting about her version is she admits that she has lots of missing time that evening. She doesn't seem to be able to account for walking across the quarter with Chad and I. Mm-hmm. Now, in that 9:30 to 11 that it took us to walk those 13 blocks and the stops that we made, all of us were very clear. We were all clear in conversation and really taking note of how weird the night was. So the fact that she has really such vague account and admits it. It's almost as if it's blanking out also.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to read that. Is that on your Facebook page?
No. We've never posted it, but
Oh,
I've got
okay.
access to it.
Okay.
I certainly would send that to you. Absolutely.
Yeah. That'd
No,
be
just
great.
out of respect for her, we've just never publicized her in any way.
Right. What made you guys want to come public with this?
Well, it was kind of a snowball kind of effect.
Right. It was never our desire.
Yeah, it was really never our desire to come forward or do radio or even write a book. We were kind of really just kind of looking for help and other experiencers, and we had shared our experiences with a couple of little local places, and we I guess we came across this one lady that is a investigator, and she worked with us and kind of talked us into doing a radio show, and then it just kind of just kept going, and then I guess we've been on doing radio shows since like 2011.
Wow. So this is all
Right,
old hat to you, huh?
Never.
No.
No. No, not ever. Because what I find most interesting out of all of this, truly interesting and very puzzling, is nobody seems to have taken any interest in what's going on with us.
Mhm.
The woman that Chad just spoke about, I say it in the highest of accord. She, starts the process, but it's all long distance. Never meets us in person, and then asks us to come on her small little podcast. And we were shocked. It wasn't something neither one of us had interest in doing. We were just trying to get help. And we put our trust into that she knew well. And we did that podcast, and then we no longer had contact with her. She'd moved on. And it from that perspective, it has been mind-boggling to both of us,
Right.
as to the fact that we've never been able to find anybody interested in what's going on with us. On a researcher, people who are truly interested in this or claim to be and investigate.
Right. I wouldn't call myself an investigator. I'm definitely interested in these types of things, and your story is very unique in a lot of ways. I think what initially drew me to this was your medical images, the X-rays and things, and I think there's good and bad about what you have, but I think there's so much more you could do to get. I think if you got some tangible evidence in the form of medical exams, that you might be able to, really obtain that help that you truly need from researchers and things taking you, a little more seriously, I guess, and not just turning a blind eye. But, I like I said, I've got suggestions. I think the best thing, and I don't mean to jump the gun here because I still want to hear about Chad's hypnotic regression, but I do have some recommendations for you, at least with dealing with the physicians. Because sometimes those guys they're definitely, how do I say it without coming off like a total a-hole? They don't want you to tell them what the issue is or what happened. They want it to be their idea. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I used to work for doctors. I'm familiar.
Right. So if you go to a doctor with any sort of ailment or condition and you claim to have a diagnosis, they're gonna not even listen to you. It doesn't matter what your sickness is and whether you're right or not. Right. You've stepped on their toes, and what do you know? You're just an internet researcher.
Exactly.
Right.
But anyway, let's go to Chad's hypnotic regression, and then I want to swing back around to what you've done with medical, at least diagnoses or evidence, and then we can go from there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So in my regression, we're standing on that stoop, mid block. Our friend had rejoined us, And I noticed this bright light coming from around the corner. And so I get the girl's attention. We walk around the corner, and we about a half a block down the street, we see this orb, very bright, white, just clean, white orb. It's probably about 12 foot in diameter. It's probably about 15 foot off the ground. And we stand there for maybe 30 seconds at the most. You know, I'm sure it was even shorter than that. And it just comes towards us and just engulfs us. It orbducts us. So, you know, because it's just this, it just takes us.
Mm-hmm.
My next memory is I'm walking down this corridor. It's kind of gently turning to the right. There's this little being in front of us that I'm following. He's about 3 foot tall. He's got a big bulbous head, kind of a pale gray skin. Now, I only saw him from behind. I didn't see his face or the front of him or anything. Now, he had substance. He wasn't like the grays on TV that you see on TV. He had substance, and you know, he was dwarfish. You know, he waddled when he walked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now out of the corner of my eye, to my left, I could see a tall blonde female. This does describe our friend, but I didn't turn to see if it was our friend. The walls and the floors and everything was just like metallic gray gunmetal color. No rivets, no bolts, no seams. Very smooth. My next memory is I'm in this room and it just seems infinite. It's very, very dark. I can't even see the walls. But it just seems like it goes on forever. To the left of me, I could see this tall blonde female laying on an examining table. She was nude, but she was censored from head to toe, so I couldn't tell who it was. I didn't see body parts or anything like that. There were 3 beings around her, one on each side and one at her head. These beings were very, very tall. They were like 7, 8 foot tall. Big bulbous heads, almost kind of praying mantis-y though, more. Mm-hmm. Now, their eyes weren't on top of their heads. They were more kind of, you know, in the middle of their face. But they had the big almond-shaped eyes. Their mouth was very close to their chin. Their arms were very long and like crinkled like a, like a mantis. They were wearing these cloaks, kind of similar to like a Grim Reaper without the hoodie, or a Jesuit priest or something like that. Mm-hmm. The person laying on the table never seemed to be in distress or anything like that. It was more like there was, unconscious or suspended animation or something, I focused my attention back to my immediate. Now, again, the room is very dark, but I could see around where this person was laying on this bed, and I could see my immediate. And when I turned around and I looked over to my right-hand side, there's this little blue being. And when I say blue, he is like this electric, live, just beautiful electric blue. And he looks a lot like the beings that you see, or the grays that you see on TV, big bulbous heads, very thin body, very thin arms. His aura, his presence was that of like a professor / shaman / scientist / healer, just this ancient, knowledge from, all of this science and spirituality combined. Mm-hmm. And he goes over and he picks up this box and he has it in his right hand. He takes his left hand and puts it into the side of the box. And when he pulls his hand out, there's this substance, and it's free floating, a couple of inches above his hand. It looks like that substance that the kids play with, the slime stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of you can kind of see through it. It's blue, just the color of him. Uh, it has little like metal flakes or glittery stuff in it, kind of floating around in it. And he takes his right hand. I don't even remember him setting down the box, but apparently he sets the box down. He takes his right hand, and he's only got 4 digits. So he takes his right hand and he puts his 2 middle fingers up, kind of almost in a peace sign, or the way that Buddhist priests or depictions of Christ kind of thing, and with his outer fingers kind of folded in towards his palm. And when he does this, the substance starts spinning. And the faster it spins, the blueness and the sparklies kind of dissipate out of it, and it's rotating around it like the sun and the earth and the sky and the universe. And it starts slowing down, and when it slows down, it had turned into this double-pointed crystal, kind of pyramided shape crystal. Very clean, very clear. I remember thinking to him, why are you showing this to me? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. This is something important. Why are you showing this to me? And he told me I would know in time, or when it's time. My next memory is I'm in this other room. There's only 3 walls, 2 very straight, one that's kind of concaved. And again, the walls are very smooth, no rivets, no bolts, no seams. In the middle of this room is this big overstuffed leather chair. And I remember thinking to myself how out of place it looks. And it looks comfortable, but it's not. I focus my attention to this wall that's kind of concave, and I walk a little closer, and what I thought was like a solid wall, it was translucent. I could see through it. It was like this whole wall was a window, and it was like 15, 18 foot long. It's and about 10 foot high, so it's just this whole big wall window. And I could see through it. And I could see stars and the galaxy and planets. And, it was like I was out in space somewhere. And I'm sitting there kind of in awe. And all of a sudden, this little craft right outside the wall window there shoots past. And it gets about 9, 10 foot past me. And it stops. And it comes back. And it's sitting right, we're face to face, between this, with this wall window. And there was like little lights blinking on it and little wires and antennas moving around on it. I could feel intelligence coming out of it. It was shaped kind of like a football, but it was about 3 foot long and about 2 foot at its widest. It sits there for about 30 seconds and then shoots off in the same direction that it was going to in the first place. And my next memory is waking up in bed the next morning.
Wow. That's just got to throw you for a loop.
Yeah. And, during my experience, I don't ever remember being anxious or scared or hurt or worried or where's Alta or where am I, nothing like that, no confused state or anything like that. I was very peaceful with my surroundings and with my environment. And
you'll take note, I wasn't with him. Mm-hmm. We were not having the same experience because in my memory, he's not with me, nor is our friend.
And Alta, did you go through any sort of hypnosis as well?
I tried several years later. A very well-known, renowned person in this field, I paid a lot of money to, and it was to no avail. It didn't work. And I had I consider it an amazing experience of high strangeness that took place at that regression, but the regression did not happen.
But you have had actual, medical tests done, and you've got some kind of, markers or evidence that you've had something placed into you.
And again, it's interesting, just my language, and I try to invite for people to kind of open their minds up to this, as I've been forced to. I'm not sure that it was placed in me until I either have memory of that or whatever is involved in this besides myself tells me that this is what was done to me. I'm not positive, so I don't use the word implant. I've always used the word unknown because as I've been forced to have to imagine and just try to express to people, what's to say that it didn't come with the package, that I'm either not born with it or whatever. If there's truth to my mother's story about when I'm a baby, I mean, we have no idea. And did something trigger it? We just have no idea.
Yeah, and I guess in radiology we would consider it a foreign body or anything that is not known to be naturally part of your anatomy.
Exactly.
Right. And, thinking if it was a foreign body, that your body usually pushes that stuff out within, years or so. And again, this has been there since 97. So,
right.
Well, just from the standpoint of what we know,
right.
And also the fact is it's got, you can feel it with your fingers. You can actually feel you can feel this object, and there are areas of this object that feel sharp, as if it should be puncturing through my skin, and yet it is not, nor has it ever caused me any pain. As I said earlier, it appears to move down to the bone. Thank the heavens I can't feel that, because I can't comprehend what I would do if I could feel something moving in me. And I can't prove any of that, but those x-rays, as mundane to me as that object looks to the naked eye, it is anything but. And it has been mind-blowing, this experience. And then again, I've had another experience where there's another object, another unknown, that's in the wrist of the same arm that seems very different. So, again, just as far as I'm concerned, there are no answers.
Well, and
I keep trying.
Yeah, I always keep trying. I would always recommend that.
Thank you.
Looking at the X-rays, I think I looked on your Facebook page. You've got them posted there, and then they're also in the book. A couple things stand out to me, and one of those is just that it's film screen imaging. There's some differences in your X-rays compared to what I think a licensed radiologic technologist taking them might perform. So I was going to ask you, who took them, and was it an actual medical doctor that ordered them? Give me kind of the setup around your case for getting those X-rays.
Right. So the original X-rays were ordered by Dr. Roger Lear, who was the only, as I put it, game in town that I could discover in the country and the world that was involved in these objects, of the removal of them. I discovered him via a book that he wrote called Alien in the Scalpel. He happened to be a podiatrist there in California. I happened to be living in Alabama at the time, out in the middle of no man's land with no help or direction. So the book was all that I had. I made contact with Dr. Lear via email. He very briefly, told me he'd be interested in talking to me with an X-ray. So we contact a local in the state MUFON group. And the woman that had been the president of MUFON had left presidency because of supposedly health situations, but she was still what appeared to be who everybody turned to, even the director of MUFON in the state, for guidance. She was kind of the head poobah. Mm-hmm. She tells me once she meets us and she feels this object in my arm, she tells me that they've got a doctor, a medical doctor, who has a, they called it a doc in the box.
Yeah.
Is that what they called it? I guess where you didn't need an appointment. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That has come to their meetings, their MUFON meetings, and has, again, I'm paraphrasing this, has made it clear to her or them that if they ever get a live one, like somebody that they think really thinks that they've been, their words, abducted and have their words, implants, he wants them to bring them to him. Because apparently he got interested in this field as a young boy with his father.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's all that I knew about him. So we make arrangements. This doctor has his office, again, in the middle of no man's land, Alabama. It is so remote that it's still a dry county. You can't buy alcohol in this county. Mm-hmm. And he makes arrangements. He tells where to be there at his office after dark. Basically, he wants
after closing time.
After closing time, he wants us there only with his little skeleton crew, is what we're told, because he doesn't want anybody to know about this. It's extremely religious, Southern Baptist, and not him necessarily, but this community, this area. Right. So this happens to be a couple hours from where we live. Also, the woman that arranged this, she happens to be in a community called Huntsville, Alabama. I'll make note of this because most people are not aware that Huntsville, Alabama is NASA. It is NASA to the point of where Werner von Braun, who is NASA, who the beginnings of NASA, the rockets, he moved to Huntsville and he started the community of Huntsville, Alabama, and died there. So it's very NASA. Now, we didn't know any of that, of course, when we moved there. It didn't matter to us, but keep that in mind. This woman happens to come from that city. She has to drive an hour and a half to this doctor's office. She lives a couple hours in another direction from us. So we're all in this kind of proximity. When Chad and I arrive at this doctor's office in his parking lot, everyone's gone other than doctor and his x-ray tech and his right-hand gal, I guess, his appointment setter. That's the only people that are in the office. When we get there, this woman, she drives up, and there's another vehicle that's with her full of people. 4 of them, if I remember correctly, 2 couples that we'd never met before, nor were we told we're going to be there. Mm-hmm. Well, these people are apparently part of her crew, and they've all shown up with tripods and all kinds of cameras. Now, I'll just say to you very quickly, I am not a happy camper. I am very upset. Chad's much calmer than I am. Now, I don't say anything, but inside I'm thinking, this is wrong. Who are these people and what are these cameras? What's going on? Well, nobody explains anything to us. These people don't even introduce themselves to us or to Chad. Doctor has that woman that arranged this originally come back to his office, and they have a little powwow privately. Then they come back and get me, and they leave Chad out there in the room with these strangers where nobody speaks to him. And that's where he's left through this experience. I think, well, this is protocol. I don't know what the heck is going on. I get back there, and I'm sorry for all the details. It has just been a very bizarre experience from a medical doctor. From a medical doctor. So this doctor has me sit up on an exam table. I've worn a little sundress, and I'm a fairly good-sized girl. I'm a plus-sized girl. I'm not huge, but I'm not tiny. I've got some pretty good-sized arms. And I wear a little spaghetti strap dress so that this doctor's got easy access to this arm. Now, he squats down like I'm a child, and I kind of appreciate that because I'm thinking, well, this is nicer than him just calling me crazy. But it's very unprofessional. I've worked for doctors. I've never seen them do that to an adult. So as I'm sitting there my legs are hanging over the table, he's kind of squatted down. The first words out of his mouth, now, again, please understand, I can't make this up. I'm just not that imaginative. The first words out of this man's mouth to me, this doctor, he didn't ask me necessarily how I was or anything about the object in my arm. His first words were, had I always known that I was psychic? Now
Okay.
that floored me. It floored me. That told me that he and this woman that I knew very briefly were having a private powwow about me, and I didn't like it. Because that's not what I was there about. I was there about this unknown in my arm. I was told he was interested and I'd get x-rays so I could get them to Dr. Lear. That's all I cared about. Well, I was shocked, and I responded to him with basically, well, sir, all my life I understand. And then he said, well, I understand there's something in your arm. And I just kind of nodded my head like, this is weird. His hand started down at the bottom of my wrist and moved very slowly up my arm. And this, as nuts as this sounds, because I've never really given an opportunity to say this publicly, and as crazy as it sounds, I almost see why now people don't want me to say this. But the fact is that this doctor, the moment that his hand touched this object in my arm, his arm recoiled, his hand recoiled, as if something bit him or shocked him, or I cannot begin to describe to you, because many other people over the years have touched this object, and never this kind of a reaction, ever. So I see a change in this doctor's face. He went from being very nice to looking very afraid. Now, his mouth wasn't hanging open and his eyes weren't bugged out, but I knew that he had changed. And he immediately gets me taken back to get the x-ray. I get back there. His x-ray tech is being very cool. She sets me up. She takes the first picture, and I get a perfect x-ray of my arm, and nothing is showing. Now, the object is sticking out of my arm, meaning it is the skin is pushed so tight. Again, it looks like a large bug bite, mosquito bite, welt. You can see it with the naked eye. When she comes out of the x-ray room, after she gets that picture, she's positive this is over. Whatever it was, no problem. There's nothing there. And of course, she can see this in my arm. Now she's starting to change, expression-wise. She's not so light and friendly. Now it's starting to feel much more uncomfortable for both of us. She goes back in to take the second picture. Once again, we get a perfect skeletal x-ray of my arm with nothing showing. Well, now she's over it. Now she wants me gone. I have to have that picture. Dr. Lear won't work with me. He won't talk to me without it. I basically, mentally, am telling the heavens to allow for this x-ray. Now, I don't know what I'm talking to. I'm begging inside of myself to get that picture. She takes the third picture, and it finally took. Now, at the point that I come out of that x-ray room, that doctor is standing now behind his administrative window with that secretary or whoever she is, his nurse. And they don't want any money from me. I'm trying to pay for this. They don't want my money. They just roll that x-ray up or whatever, rolled up in a sleeve, hand it to me through the window, and get Chad and I out of the building. By the time we get out into the front of the doctor's office, it's pitch black out because it's fairly late now. Doctor doesn't have any lights in his parking lot. Now, this crew that have shown up with all the cameras, they're very upset because they've missed out on everything. Now, I don't even know what they're doing there, except I do know they expected to come there and film this doctor cutting this out of my arm. There is no doubt to me. So they're very unhappy. Again, I don't even know who these people are. So I'm not addressing them in any way. I'm telling this woman that arranged all of this is over. I said, I don't know what happened in there, but your doctor is done with me. Now, they think I'm crazy. How can a doctor be done with me? Well, that doctor comes around his building, and before he got in his car, in front of Chad and I, and this little group standing there, and the woman who arranged this. He's speaking to me now. And he's very close to my face. And he basically says, I don't know if you drink or not, but I'm going home to have a
big one or
big
something.
one. Something,
a double or something like that.
some kind of crazy language like this in a dry county. And he flips around. He gets in his car, and he's got gravel in his parking lot. He throws gravel. He leaves there so fast. Now, he never looks back. Now, I tell this crew, I'm telling you he's done. And I'm so sorry. And I have no idea what's happened. You know, Chad and I are making apologies for this kind of insane behavior. So to finish up on this doctor, we get home a couple hours away. We get that x-ray sent to Dr. Lear immediately. Dr. Lear receives it. He sends me an email, very short, sweet, and direct, that he needs another x-ray, a second x-ray, so he can alleviate artifacts. I tell him, oh, dear Dr. Lear, you have no idea what I've been put through, what we've been put through. Because I'm thinking this doctor is involved in this arena. He can give us some guidance. Well, no, that didn't happen. He had nothing to offer to me other than to say, if you don't do what I've asked, I'll send you back your original x-ray and we'll forget this conversation ever took place. Well, I'm like, well, there's a doctor. That's what I'm used to. Now, beyond frustrated, I tell Chad, now please know this, because again, I'm not given very much opportunity to ever share this, which I've been sad about, as hard as this is to explain to people, that people have not taken interest in this. When I tell Chad, we've got to go back to that doctor. I've got to get that second x-ray. Chad is very clear to tell me that he knows this is not a good idea. So please, folks, anybody that's interested in hearing what we are saying, forgive what I am about to share with you, because this is horrible behavior on my part that I would never do again. But it is what I did. I told Chad, I said, I don't care what that doctor wants. Dr. Lear will not work with us if I don't get that x-ray. And we've already been through this, Chad. We're going back. I said, please call the doctor's office and make an appointment. Because I'm thinking, Chad's a man. He didn't scare him. They'll talk to him. Well, that was stupid on my part. Chad, would you share, please, what you experienced when you called his office?
Yeah, it was, they told me that he was out of the country, and they didn't know when he would be back.
They told Chad he was out of the country. So just to finish that story, I'm beyond angry. I'm beyond angry. I can't begin to tell you how insulted I feel. Well, that was stupid on my part. I should have just taken the clue. Well, I didn't. I tell Chad, we're going. I said, I'm going to show this doctor how to do a peaceful Indian sit-in. I said, Chad, we're going back. And I said, I'll sit there until this doctor sees me. I don't care how long it takes. He called the woman long distance who set this up originally, that's with MUFON. She's angry because this has happened to us. She says she wants to join in our little sit-in. Well, okay. More than I asked for. I just wanted to give her the courtesy to tell her that we were doing this. We all drive back to that doctor's office. That doctor made us wait for over 8 hours. Over 8 hours.
Just to get an x-ray.
Just to get an x-ray.
Wow.
When he ushered me back, he was so angry. He was staring at me. I mean, he was shooting daggers at me through his window. Now I'm scared because I can feel and see in his face how angry he is that I have done this and that I've outed him. Well, I don't care.
We didn't out him. We just
but I'm
came
just
in for an
expressing
x-ray.
what it felt like that I was receiving from him. So I finally, at this point now, Chad and I and that woman all go back together because I'm not going back there alone. And we go into a little waiting room. I go in to get the picture. Once again, apparently it doesn't want to take a picture because now I'm sitting up on an exam table again. Chad's sitting in a chair in front of me, and this woman is sitting next to him. Small room. Doctor comes bouncing through the door. He never acknowledges me. He never looks at me, never acknowledges me. He doesn't acknowledge my husband. He only deals with this woman. And he's telling her in a very joyous voice, it's over. There's nothing there. It's over. Well, he flips around because I said, well, then, sir, doctor, what is this? And I'm pointing at my arm, and it's standing out in my arm. Well, he starts moving towards me, pulling a black Sharpie pen out of his pocket like a weapon at me. And I am beside myself because that's how he's acting as he's moving towards me. Angry, and what is he going to do to me with that pen? And when he gets over to me, he draws a huge bullseye on my arm. And I felt absolutely assaulted. From the moment that pen touched my arm, I felt like I was being assaulted. And then, I guess, again, I share the emotions because this is my truth. I go back. It takes its picture. I'm released from this torment. They hand me the x-ray, asked me for $100. I gave them the $100. They gave me the x-ray. We left. Nobody said anything else to us. We get that x-ray. We're on the way of getting the second x-ray to Dr. Lear, and he chose to drop us. He chose not to work with us. There's more to that story that we've never gone public about until just recently somebody asked us the truth about that. We shared it. But it's not been our nature to be public about any of what I consider the really bizarre and bad behavior of humans involved in this arena. So those were the original x-rays. Several years later, I decided to get x-rays again of it because I'd already had another experience where I had another object in my wrist. So I decide Chad and I decide we're going to get x-rays, fresh x-rays of the original object and the one in my wrist. This was done in the city of Birmingham, Alabama, by a chiropractor who was also interested in this area. She handled it like I'm used to doctors handling things, like a professional doctor. Took the x-rays. The object in the upper arm took its x-ray as normal. No funny business on this occasion. First time, first picture, we get the picture, but the object in the wrist won't x-ray. That was detected via ultrasound. So, long answer. That's the history on those x-rays.
Yeah, so we actually there's 3 different x-rays of this object. The last ones from the chiropractor are the ones that are on our website or on our Facebook page and the ones that are in the book. The copies of the one that we sent to Dr. Lear, I believe we have a copy, but I'm not 100% sure. I kind of put them away and...
I got so angry and frustrated with all of this that I just was trying to give up on it because we felt like it had been given up on us. So there's been a little bit of, we've done a lot of moving sense and so on, but that is the history of those x-rays.
Okay. Well, and I wish we had some more time. I've got some suggestions just from what I know of medical imaging. I'm looking at these x-rays, and I could see where they might assume that the object might be an artifact, and I can understand medically why they would want to retest and get more images. I've done quality assurance. I used to teach, a quality assurance course in radiography, and when you get these old film screen images, which you have a film loaded into a cassette. It's a common artifact that can occur. I wouldn't say just looking at it you could tell it's an artifact, but I think that would be, in order to eliminate any suspicion, probably the next logical thing to do would be to retest and get more images on different cassettes or in a different location just to rule that out. So I don't know that he was necessarily doubting the results, but maybe just taking a step to further confirm that this is a legitimate object in there.
Oh, absolutely. Again, there's no doubt to us that Dr. Lear knew. He knew. There is no doubt to me that he knew that whatever the real deal is, we are. And he knew that. And I knew that he knew that. Now, again, I am not creating that. So there was no doubt to us why he was requesting that second x-ray, and we honored that because we understood why he was asking. Mm-hmm. He did this of everybody. Yeah. This was required part of the the genre that he was involved in.
Right.
So yeah, I've had nothing but 20 years, actually the last 18, I would say, steadily at it, researching, giving it everything I've got to try to understand what I can understand about all of this. I would just suggest, I realize that you need to go, and we're so appreciative of the time that you've given us and your interest. I would just like you to know, though, that in all these years that I've been involved in this, I've never found anybody interested. What good does it do us to have the object removed, to have no one interested? It is tremendous expense. It's tremendous hardship. And I also would like for people to think about this. Let's say that whatever put it there, whatever is going on, is not going to put us through this, to repeat this. Now that I've had this second experience, I assure you it happens. So, again, going through all of this for the purpose of, so far I've not found anybody interested. I have a very close, we consider her a member of our family, that's a biochemist. She had access to the most amazing equipment in her lab. And from the moment we connected over this, she made it very clear to me how much she loves us, but she has no interest in this, and she knows no other scientist does either. Now, that's a very broad statement, but she refused to help me. Refused, because she says it is out of our box. And I mean, she was very clear about that. And I just was so saddened to hear this.
That's unfortunate.
Yes, it is. But again, we're so grateful to your interest. We thank you so much.
Right.
Well, absolutely. And, before we go, I want to make sure people know where they can go to find your book.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Well, again, you can find us on Facebook. It's Orbducted in the French Quarter. I do have a link there that you can buy it off of Etsy, or if you prefer, you can just contact me direct, and we can go through PayPal. Also, we will be having a book signing October 19th at Gallery 2 it's on the 800 block of Royal Street. They have some amazing...
which is in the French Quarter.
Yeah, which is in the French Quarter. They have amazing UFO art, and the people there heard us on a show and just really connected with us and wanted us to be there. So we'll be there doing a live book signing and telling of our story on October 19th. And so that's...
And we invite you, before we have to part, please, any opportunity you ever get, if you ever get an opportunity to come here, please, give us heads up, and we'd love to show you, where this has taken place, and going back through the route of that evening and just the French Quarter in general. So please let us know if you ever come this direction.
I certainly will. I'll take you up on that.
Absolutely. It'd be our honor.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Chad and Alta Dillard, authors of Orbducted in the French Quarter. I want to send a huge thank you to Chad and Alta for their time, for sending me their book, and for their flexibility with scheduling our interview. They have graciously agreed to allow me to run a giveaway of their book. I'm going to provide you 2 ways to enter for a chance to win. As you probably know, every time I release a new episode, I post the episode art on social media. All you need to do for the first opportunity to win is comment on my Instagram post with the episode art for this episode. It's the post with the title and episode number, which also happens to have a picture of an alien face from the cover of their book. One very important detail when you comment: you'll need to tell me how you found the show within your comment. That's it for the Instagram option. The other way you can enter for a chance to win is by providing an iTunes review for the show. You will have until Friday, September 15th at midnight Pacific Standard Time to enter. That gives you about a week and a half after this episode airs to enter one or both of the ways. Only 1 entry per Instagram account will be considered, and obviously 1 entry per iTunes review, for a total of 2 chances to enter to win. I'll announce the official winner on my episode that comes out Monday, September 18th. If you happen to be listening to this while you're driving or otherwise incapable of writing this down while you're listening, I'll have these instructions for you in the show notes at deviatus.com as well. And in the show notes this week, I have some images you'll want to check out of the location of their abduction, as well as the x-rays discussed during the interview. And I've even included the follow-up email I sent to them about obtaining additional support from the medical community. If you're a new listener, or if you have questions, guest suggestions, or your own story to share, you can email me at deviatuspod@gmail.com. I'm looking for more personal stories right now, so don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on the social medias at deviatuspod for Twitter and Instagram, and of course, there's my Facebook fan page and my YouTube channel. And once more, you can get my free monthly newsletter packed full of paranormal paraphernalia by signing up on the homepage at deviatus.com. You may opt out at any time, and I'm always open to suggestions regarding the content you would find most valuable. Thank you so much for listening to the show, and good luck on the giveaway. I'll leave you this week with a quote from Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote, "There is no exquisite beauty without some strangeness in the proportion." Have a great week.